After the mega success of Star Wars in 1977, George Lucas was given the green light to move ahead with the trilogy that he had envisioned. 3 years after the first movie, audiences were treated to the following chapter, Star Wars Episode V: The Empire Strikes Back. This film is widely regarded as the single greatest installment in the Star Wars saga, and it's also often hailed as the greatest sequel ever made. Can I argue with that? Maybe Before Sunset? So in this film, after the Death Star is destroyed, the Rebel Alliance are hiding out in their secret base on the ice planet Hoth. After battle on the planet, Luke Skywalker is instructed by the spirit of Obi-Wan Kenobi to go to Dagobah to learn the ways of the Force from Yoda, the only living Jedi Master. Meanwhile, Han Solo and Leia are in space being pursued by the Empire, still led by Darth Vader, who escaped the Death Star destruction at the end of A New Hope. Now aware of Luke's Force abilities and the threat that he is to the Empire, Vader plots to use Han and Leia's bait to set a trap to turn Luke to the dark side. Reminder, this review contains spoilers. Really, the worst thing I can say about this movie is some pacing issues in the first 15 minutes. It starts with Luke getting knocked out by a Yeti-like monster called a Wampa, which drags him to his cave and somehow freezes his feet to the ceiling. Luke manages to escape, but passes out in the chilling cold before being rescued by Han. The only thing this accomplishes is allowing a moment for Luke to be alone so that Obi-Wan can tell him to go to Dagobah, which doesn't require him getting into any kind of peril. There could have just been a scene where everyone is sleeping and Luke gets woken up by Obi-Wan's voice, and it would have amounted to the same thing. But aside from that, you got a near-flawless movie that does everything that a sequel should do. It adds dimension to the characters and delves deeper into its universe and its mythos, while also making the action bigger and better. With an increased budget of $18 million over A New Hope's $11 million, the effects are even more magnificent for the time. The opening shot of the Star Destroyer I could believe is a real image in space. And the battle sequences generate even more excitement with their new and interesting locations. We get the Battle of Hoth on the snowy plain where rebels and their snowspeeders face off against armored AT-AT walkers, and the space chase where Han and Leia fly through an asteroid field on the Millennium Falcon with Imperial TIE fighters on their tail. Along with the classic theme, John Williams fills the soundtrack with more music equally great, including the most recognizable, the Imperial March, the iconically sinister track that is always used to signify the dastardly presence of Lord Vader. Carrying Han and Leia's side of the story is their will-they, won't-they relationship. The interplay with them is very sharp and very funny. Honestly, I think my favorite scene with them is their kiss in the power supply room.
I happen to like nice men.
Nice man.
Very nice.
Sir, I've isolated the reverse power flux coupling.
Quite interesting how a movie from 1980 messes around with the cliche of people about to lock lips but are interrupted before they can do so. Here they have C-3PO interrupt Han and Leia while they're kissing. You know, the more I watch these movies, the more stuff I find that's really ahead of its time. So they go to the planet Bespin to take shelter in Cloud City, where Han reunites with Lando Calrissian, aka the best smile in the galaxy. But Lando stabs them in the back and hands them over to Vader, who uses Han as the test subject for carbon freezing, which he plans on using for Luke before bringing him to his master, Emperor Sidious. When Leia says to Han, "I love you," before Han is lowered into the freezing chamber, the script had him reply, "Just remember that, because I'll be back." However, Harrison Ford was very unsure about whether he'd be reprising the role in the next film, so he suggested a new line, one that is full-on Han, and it was what made it into the film.
I love you.
I know.
It's such an emotional scene that on my first viewing, even I wasn't sure if we were going to see Han again. On Luke's side of the story, he follows Obi-Wan's instructions to travel to Dagobah, and it's here that we are introduced to the greatest character in all of Star Wars, the 900-year-old pointy-eared Muppet, Yoda. When we first meet him, he appears to be just this curious little critter who rummages through Luke's belongings, tossing out thing after thing. But it turns out he's actually the wisest Jedi who ever lived, informing Luke that when it comes to using the Force, do or do not. There is no try. When you find out who Yoda really is, it makes the scene where we're introduced to him even funnier. Being the opposite of his wise self was an act. Since he's in hiding, he needs to find out who Luke is before making it evident that he's a Jedi Master. When Luke gives up on using the Force to raise his X-Wing from the swamp and Yoda does it for him, Yoda's line to Luke is one that I think even Jesus wishes that he thought of when Peter failed to walk on the water.
I don't believe it.
That is why you fail.
Seriously, if there's one Star Wars character who deserves his own spin-off film, it's Yoda. If you permit me, Seagulls, a Star Wars story. The puppet work on Yoda is some of the best ever put to film, and he still looks more alive than the CG version of him in the prequels. And Frank Oz's vocal performance is so legendary that George Lucas spent thousands of dollars on an advertising campaign to score Oz an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Of course, this didn't work though, since he was a puppeteer with no on-screen presence. What really makes this a sequel that is better than the original is how it expands on the concept of the Force. And Luke's character growth is more than just him trusting in the Force, it's about his inner turmoil. How he senses that Vader is after Han and Leia and is desperate to confront him, while Yoda and Obi-Wan's spirit try to tell him that he's not ready. In a scene where Yoda tells Luke to go inside an underground cave, an area that is strong with the dark side of the Force, Luke asks what's in there, and Yoda replies, "Only what you take with you." He goes in to find what appears to be Darth Vader, and after a brief lightsaber duel, he cuts off Vader's head easily. But underneath the mask, what Luke sees is his own face. Even at just 10 years old, I found this movie challenging. I kept wondering to myself what that scene meant, before my older sister explained to me that Luke was fighting against himself. More specifically, he was fighting against his own dark side. Eventually, Luke does go against Yoda's warning to not confront Vader until his training is complete, and when he arrives at Cloud City, he goes into the freezing room to find Vader there waiting for him. The lighting, the rising steam, and no music, just the sound of Vader's breathing, the atmosphere is just perfect. I was downright unnerved as a kid watching this duel begin, and then I got a little relief when I saw this one shot where Luke takes 2 aggressive steps forward and Vader backs up accordingly. I remember thinking, haha, Vader is scared of Luke. Now I realize as an adult that what Vader is actually doing is allowing Luke to get overconfident. He wants him to unleash his anger, as it would help pave his way to the dark side. The swordplay is swifter and more engaging than that between Vader and Obi-Wan in A New Hope, and instead of just one hallway, the fight goes from room to room and finally into Cloud City's reactor shaft. It's here that Luke loses a hand in the fight, and I remember how that shocked me as a kid. And then, as Luke hangs on the edge, Vader reveals the dreadful truth in the most famous plot twist in cinematic history.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me you killed him.
No. I am your father.
In denial, Luke lets himself fall into the shaft, but is ejected beneath the floating building and he hangs from an antenna. Leia senses where he is, which is our first hint as to who the other Skywalker is that Yoda mentioned to Obi-Wan earlier. The movie ends with Chewie and a reformed Lando taking off to find Han, Luke getting a mechanical hand, and him standing there with Leia pondering an uncertain future. Sadly, I already knew that Vader was Luke's father before I saw the movie, and I have Toy Story 2 and Adventures in Odyssey to thank for that. But back in 1980, this kind of big reveal and cliffhanger was never seen before. Like I said in my review for A New Hope, when I see a decades-old movie, I try to put myself in the shoes of those who first saw it, and in the case of The Empire Strikes Back, I can easily imagine this being for them what Infinity War was for us. They must have been left in such a daze with so many questions, wanting nothing more than to see what comes next. For me, The Empire Strikes Back is a movie that was thought-provoking when I was a kid, and over the years, I've grown to respect it more and more for that. The acting and effects are still solid for the time, and it delivers the action and continuous world-building needed to be more than a worthy sequel to the biggest film of the age, on top of adding depth to the main characters, the villain, and the Force itself. All the while, it expertly sets up the next installment in the way that a predecessor should. Even though I knew the big reveal at the end, I was still in great anticipation for Return of the Jedi. Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, is to this day the greatest movie in the saga, and one of my favorite films of all time. I give it a 94%. So like in my review for A New Hope, I'll go over some of the good and bad changes in the 1997 Special Edition and any following DVD releases. I was mostly indifferent to the re-recording of Boba Fett's lines with the voice of Temuera Morrison to be more consistent with Attack of the Clones. But I liked the windows and balconies added in to give Cloud City more spectacle, and the additional wide shots of the Wampa. And since Clive Reville didn't reprise his role in Return of the Jedi, it was reasonable to replace him with Ian McDiarmid on the hologram since the two Emperors look nothing alike. However, The Empire Strikes Back also has probably the most pointless of all special edition changes. Some are just short extra lines that you wouldn't even catch unless you've memorized every single line from the original.
Oh, this is suicide. Oh, this is suicide. There's nowhere to go.
In the original, when the swamp monster spits out R2-D2, as Luke props him upright again, he quips,
You're lucky you don't taste very good.
but in the special edition, it's just,
You were lucky to get out of there.
what was the point of that? Sure, the original line wasn't a gut-buster, but it was perfectly chuckle-worthy. And Darth Vader's blunt command of,
Bring my shuttle.
is much cooler than the special editions.
Alert my Star Destroyer to prepare for my arrival.
But the worst change by far is having Luke scream as he plummets into the reactor shaft. It was supposed to be a silent fall. Luke knew that falling to his death was the only escape from letting himself go with Vader. He didn't know that there was any chance of survival. What's worse is that the scream is clearly the Emperor's from Return of the Jedi. Did George Lucas really think that no one was going to recognize that? It couldn't have been any more distracting or less dignified if he used this.
Come with me. It is the only way.
Fortunately, Lucas was nice enough to omit the screen in releases after the 1997 edition. Now, instead of going to the next film to be released, I'm going to review these movies in the best order to watch them. That's starting with A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, going to the prequels, and then seeing Return of the Jedi. This way you get the reveal of the Empire, and the note that you're left on before you go to the sequel trilogy isn't the tragedy of Revenge of the Sith. So be sure to stick around for my review of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and all of the following, leading up to the release of Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. That's a wrap for now. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. Like and share, subscribe for more. This is Pop Culture. I'm Alex Pop, and may the Force be with you.